Well, welcome to Andrew's Review. Tonight's episode we'll be looking at the 2002 film Hero, starring Jet Li. It is a Chinese film, spoken in Chinese. It is subtitled in English, however. But in this review, fair warning, there may be a few mispronounced Chinese words. Well, there wouldn't be if you had taken the time to learn how to pronounce them. Such insight and wisdom you have over there. I'm the brains, you are the looks, which means we're in trouble on both fronts. But it is important to point out that the film is indeed in Chinese, not only because it's glaringly obvious to anyone watching the film, but it means that we need to appreciate Chinese culture and symbolism to fully understand the film. Quite right. The film is a wuxia film. Wuxia. Right, wuxia. We'll cover that in a moment, but first let's have a look at the film's director, Zhang Yimou. There's another one of those words, or names in this case, you didn't learn how to pronounce properly. It's pronounced more like Zhang Yimou, and being a Chinese name, Zhang is his family name. Well, it's spelled Z-H-A-N-G. In English it is. Zhang Yimou is a Chinese director who's worked as an actor and cinematographer on several films. However, we'll focus on his directorial career. He's been directing films and stage plays for quite some time. We'll focus on the films though. He started with Red Sorghum in 1987, a film based upon a novel. The film received much critical praise and won the Golden Bear Award at the Berlin Film Festival that year. The film is noted for its vivid use of colour. It's a violent film and a graphic film as well, narrated by an unseen character. Zhang Yimou has quite a few films that are based upon novels, and quite a lot of his films have been nominated for awards, and quite a few have won awards as well. Yeah, I was quite surprised to learn that as well. It's a director that I hadn't heard of until you started researching the film. And I suppose that's understandable because he's a Chinese director who directs Chinese language films, and given Hollywood's propensity to whitewash particular things, it's not surprising. So you might remember a hashtag that was surfacing around the Oscars last year. It was Oscars So White. That might explain a few things there. Yeah, I do remember that. Some of Zhang's other films that our audience might know include House of Flying Daggers in 2004 and 2016's The Great Wall, which stars Matt Damon, which I must admit I was a little bit confused to see Matt Damon in a film about Imperial China. This has also been accused of Hollywood whitewashing. Yes, I recall. Back to Hero though. Hero is the story of Nameless, an assassin who is meeting with the King of Qin after defeating 3 other assassins. Now he's meeting with the king to collect a reward for defeating these dangerous enemies. The King of Qin is a warring king and has developed many enemies because of his conquering. The story begins with a grand entrance for Nameless, walking into the palace courtyard lined with hundreds of advisors and soldiers. As Nameless enters the hall, the advisors warn him not to approach within 100 paces of the king. One of the assassin's weapons is presented to the king, and Nameless is invited to within 20 paces. The king then asks him to tell him the story of how he defeated these 3 assassins. The first one being Long Sky, who is played by Donnie Yen, who uses a silver spear. The other, Broken Sword, played by Tony Leung, who uses a broad but broken sword. And the final is Flying Snow, who is played by Maggie Cheung, and she uses a thin sword. Nameless tells the king that he learns of Sky's love for chess and music, and that he tracks him to a chess house. The scene then cuts to the chess house. It's raining and the people are wearing colours of greens and greys. Sky is wearing maroon and mustard coloured clothes. 7 elite guards from Qin reveal themselves and fight with Sky. He defeats them without killing them. As he is leaving, Nameless appears and challenges him to a fight. Yeah, it's quite a magnificent scene. The use of the rain and the Guqin music, which is a guitar-like instrument, the camera shots, close-ups, the wide shots really build the intensity. Nameless also narrates to the king throughout the scene, which adds another sense of surrealness to the whole thing. The wuxia film tradition of exaggerated kung fu abilities is done so well that it seems very graceful and almost believable. It's not over the top, and the choreography is done so well that it's hard to remember that these are actors playing roles. Although both Jet Li and Donnie Yen are very skilled martial artist champions, in fact. It's like that throughout the whole film too. It's just brilliant. Of course, in the end, we already know that Nameless defeats Long Sky, but the whole time you're watching it, you're not actually sure it's going to happen. At the end of the scene, Long Sky is killed. We cut back to the king, imagining the whole scene with his eyes closed. The king remarks to Nameless that he prides himself on knowing his kingdom very well, and is amazed that someone with such skill and ability was able to exist within his kingdom without the king being aware of it. Another court official brings the swords of Broken Sword and Flying Snow to the king. Nameless is invited to advance within 10 paces of the king. You also notice that the only colour in the scene, which is set in a rather large hall, is the reward. The king then tells of a previous assassination attempt on his life by Flying Snow and Broken Sword, and this is the reason that the hall is empty, so an attack doesn't happen again. The king then asks how one man could have defeated these two assassin lovers when an entire army failed. Nameless says that he did not do it with his sword. The scene changes to a desert. Nameless narrates that he learnt that Sword and Snow were hiding out at a calligraphy school. Nameless is on his way there. He poses as a citizen of an opposing kingdom and asks Sword to paint a character, the character being Sword. Everything here is absolutely red, bright red. Everyone's clothes, the utensils, the walls, the floor, everything is red. This is happening while the Qin army is approaching. Nameless also narrates that he learnt that Snow and Sky were once lovers, but that Sword was unaware of this. But before he can begin the character, the Qin army arrives and begins firing many thousands of arrows into the school. Briefly, the scene cuts back to Nameless and the king, where it is revealed that Nameless has asked Sword to create the 20th variation of the character Sword. This is to reveal his skills as a swordsman. After the attack, Nameless reveals to both Sword and Snow that he is a citizen of Qin and has killed Sky, presenting his spear as proof. We then cut back to the hall, where the scroll of the character is unrolled for the king. Nameless says that Sky would be avenged by the one who touched his heart, referring to Snow. Sword is immediately heartbroken and has sex with his apprentice Moon, who is played by Zhang Yimou, which Snow does see, and in her jealousy kills Sword and then isolates herself. But seeking vengeance for her master's death, Moon pursues Snow and tries to kill her. Yeah, so this epic battle occurs between the two in a grove of trees that are just covered with yellow leaves. The leaves are falling from the trees, and the ground is already covered in the leaves. Now, Snow is far superior in her skill than Moon, and tells Moon that she will not fight her. Moon attempts many times to defeat Snow, but Snow skillfully and gracefully evades her attacks. Eventually, Snow retaliates, and the ensuing battle is laced with amazing use of the leaves to highlight the fight scenes and the fury of it all. After Moon is killed, all the leaves turn to red. Snow is almost absorbed by the leaves. After this, Snow appears at the Qin camp, and because of everything that's transpired, she's easily defeated by Nameless. The king does not believe Nameless, however. He says that the people Nameless has described do not resemble the warriors that broke into the castle and tried to assassinate him 3 years ago. The king says to Nameless that he has underestimated the king. The king then begins to give an account of what he thinks happened, namely that Sky and Nameless are working together in order to assassinate the king, and that Snow and Sword agree to take part because of Sky's participation. Nameless draws out the plan in front of Sky and Snow in a purple library. Everything is coloured purple, including their clothes. Snow agrees to be killed by Nameless as part of the plan in order to facilitate the ruse for the king. Sword also presents Nameless with his weapon so that it furthers the ruse. After this, Nameless also informs the king that he has underestimated someone, being Broken Sword. The scene cuts back to the library, where everyone is now dressed in white. Nameless proves his sword skills with a demonstration to Snow and Sword. He asks that one of them being stabbed by him in such a way that the wound will be deep but not fatal, in front of the Qin army as witnesses. It is learned that this is what happened to Sky and that he is recovering. Snow informs Nameless that Broken Sword once had an opportunity to kill the king, but did not. The king is curious as to why this is the case, but Nameless is unable to offer an explanation. The scene then cuts back to the Qin army camp, where Snow is stabbed by Nameless with the appearance of death. Nameless and Sword meet, and Sword explains how he and Snow met. The scene changes to green, and details of their history and the assassination attempt of the king are given, during which we learn the reason of Sword's hesitation to kill the king. He learnt through his study of calligraphy that it and swordsmanship are both linked and are trying to return to a simple state of peace. He explains this to Nameless, writing 2 words in the dirt: our land. Nameless is moved by this, but continues his attempt to assassinate the king. As Nameless explains all this, the king is humbled by the fact that an assassin, Broken Sword, could truly understand the king's heart in trying to unite China. The king is facing the scroll, while archers and court officials surround the Great Hall, having learned of Nameless's plan. The king realises that the scroll does not contain any secrets of swordsmanship, but rather the ideal of a warrior. He explains that the warrior begins as someone who masters his sword, and then as someone who can kill people without using a weapon, but then ultimately as someone who does not desire to kill at all, but rather wants to exist in peace with all around him. Nameless then attempts his assassination of the king. However, he does not assassinate the king, but rather asks him to remember the highest ideals for a warrior, a state of peace. We then cut to Snow and Sword, who have just learnt that the assassination has failed. Snow accuses Sword of betrayal. She fights him, but he does not want to fight her back. She then kills him unexpectedly after he refuses to defend himself. She then kills herself. The officials now are demanding that the king execute Nameless. The king is reluctant and hesitates for quite a while, but gives the order. A sea of arrows shoots across the scene, and Nameless is killed. The final thought of the film is that the Chinese people still call China our land. It's a really excellent film, and it gripped me all the way through. It's an epic tale, and it's one that you don't really want to end. It seems to just draw you in and make you a part of it. It's a wuxia film, which generally Westerners will recognise as kung fu flicks, although this is done in a way that makes it a little bit different while still retaining the principles of a wuxia film. Wuxia films are all quite similar in that the hero overcomes some sort of tragedy, but they have to go through some kind of journey in order to be able to do that. And usually that journey involves a process of self-reflection, learning martial arts, abiding by a code of honour, and then righting the wrongs that have been done, correcting the injustices, and so that justice is served. And this is very typical of a lot of kung fu films. There's generally a sense of honour among all the characters, even the evil ones. They all tend to abide by this unspoken rule of honouring each other and doing what is right, even if they have opposing motives. And of course, one of the biggest things in a wuxia film is the excellence of skill, even hyperbolic skill, in martial arts. Yes, but there's much more to this film than simply being a tale of a man attempting to assassinate a king. There's quite a lot of nationalistic undertones in this film which become quite overt in the end. It's loosely based off people from China's history. The actual emperor is Qin Shi Huang. Qin Shi Huang, right. Jet Li's character is also based loosely off a man who attempted to assassinate that emperor, Jing Qi. Jing Ke, right. But the plot is about the king, not the assassins. The 3 or 4 end up dead. Hero attempts to portray the moment the king of Qin shifts his thinking, enabling him to become the first emperor of a united China. A quote from the movie: "One person's suffering is nothing compared to the suffering of all. The conflict between Zhao and Qin is nothing when compared with peace for all," can really be interpreted as promoting the image of China that we see today as very nationalistic and communist government. So, in the wuxia genre, this film kind of turns the principles on its head a little bit, in that the one we think is the hero, Nameless, is actually the one using deceit the whole way through, and the king is shown to be honourable all the way throughout. Nameless does redeem himself at the end of the film. However, the only 2 characters that are shown to maintain their honour all the way through the king and broken sword. Yeah, these themes of loyalty and justice, good versus evil, come up a lot in wuxia films. Hero does it in a way that you start off wanting the king to be assassinated. However, by the end of the film, you really don't want that at all. Another thing Hero does really well is its use of very vivid colours, and this is something very typical of Zhang Yimou. The bright and vivid colours make the film very interesting to watch and almost section it off into chapters or acts. I don't think that the colours specifically represent anything symbolic, at least in a Western sense, and a study of the meaning of colours for Chinese culture didn't really marry up with what was being portrayed within the scenes when this was occurring, at least most of the time. For example, red represents happiness, joy, luck, and is worn by brides. Yellow represents prosperity and royalty. Yet the scene where sun and moon are fighting doesn't represent any of these values. I think, in fact, what it probably represents more than anything is the Chinese flag, which is, of course, red and yellow. But black is associated with evil, and the Qin Empire, their colour scheme seems to be black. Everything is dark and devoid of other colours. Another thing you may notice is that when colour is used in Hero, is that it tends to dominate just about everything, even shading the landscape and sky to some degrees. It's really amazing technique when Nameless and the King are describing the various events. The last colour used is white, and white represents purity in Chinese symbolism. It's used when Broken Sky is convincing Nameless and thus the King that peace is more important than the assassination. During this section of the film, as the King becomes more enlightened, even the palace and the surrounding hall become more lit and more colour is let into that particular scene. Yes, it's quite powerful, as is the cinematography, which was done by an Australian man named Christopher Doyle, who goes by the name of Do Ker Fung. He was awarded 4 awards for Hero alone and has won many more, including for Rabbit Proof Fence. He only uses a few panning shots in the film and a number of tracking shots, and the rest the camera is quite still, using close-ups and wide shots to really build the intensity and the dramatic feel of the film. It's very, very good. The point of view shots he uses quite a lot really help to build the sense of loyalty and honour and vengeance, which is especially important for a wuxia film. This is a really well-made film. It's quite true to its genre. But being a wuxia film, there's nothing in it that's overtly Christian. China is heavily influenced by Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism, and these things aren't really congruent in Christianity. But having said that, there is a little oasis in what you might call a void, and that is Broken Sword. And he can be called a Christ figure, in that he is quite patient, quite wise, but ultimately sacrifices himself for the ideals he believes in. I'm sure this is not what the director had in mind when this event happened. However, being a Christian and having a Christological hermeneutic, it's quite hard to miss. Aside from that, we see a lot of actions that Christ would not condone, I don't think. A rather utilitarian ethic, the ends justifying the means. A great example of this is when the king orders the execution of Nameless. The king doesn't necessarily want to do this, but he must in order to maintain rule, although the king does treat Nameless as a hero after his death. Yet the principles of loyalty, honour and self-discipline are strongly Christian, and they do seem to be somewhat lacking in Western culture, which may be somewhat of the allure of a wuxia film in the West, that these principles are on display. It really is a great film, but to fully appreciate it, we must remember that we need to understand the culture in which it was created, or at the very least understand the wuxia genre. Even with biblical interpretation, we need to remember that we're relying on a translation if we're reading in English. And the same is true for this film. And translations just don't do justice to the original. Even the director, when asked if Our Land was an appropriate translation, he said he's not sure. Well, that's it from me, him, us. Thanks for tuning in.